Hi, everyone. We are live with our third day of our Banned Books Week library live stream. My name is Amie Wright. I'm a library manager by day, so sort of Barbara Gordon by day, and I am the co-chair of the convention planning team for the American Library Association Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable. So I'm here today joined by creator Grace Ellis. Thank you so much, Grace. But before we get going, I just want to give some special shout outs to Image Comics, the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, CBLDF, and the American Library Association Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable. So for all of you who are joining, we hope that we have some pretty good representation from librarians and educators. So we're going to do a short poll just to start us off. So like pretend we're in a big convention hall, ideally well stocked with people. And we want to find out, who do we have in the audience? Do we have educators, librarians, school librarians, comic fans? Hopefully you're all comic fans. So if you guys just want to type in the chat, see who we have in the audience. So again, do we have educators, librarians, school librarians, other creators? Pornsak from Monday night was saying that he was going to join us and like totally, harass us. So Pornsak, are you on right now? I don't know. Maybe he is, or maybe he isn't. Let's see. So the other thing is, if we have anybody on the chat, do we have anyone who's actually had a banned or challenged book themselves? Just please type in. So one thing I will, as I'm waiting for you guys to type in, we're just going to go over just two definitions, which when we talk about banned and when we talk about challenges. So a lot of people like to talk about books being banned. More often than not, in library land or in education land, we talk a lot about books being challenged, which means that somebody comes to maybe the library, comes to central administration and says, I don't feel like this book is a good fit for the collection. It's a whole process. Most libraries, we actually will have our collection development policy online. We have standards for why we collect what we do. If something follows through all the steps of the challenge and then a decision is actually made to remove the book from the library shelves, the school shelves, that is when we actually consider a book to be banned. So now that we're all on, the same page about bans and challenges. Oh yeah, yeah, of course, Grace. I'm here to talk to you.
Sorry.
Please interrupt.
So what is gatekeeping?
Oh, gatekeeping. Context? Okay, this is a very good question. So we talked a lot about the fact that we talk about bans and we talk about challenges, but one of the things we don't talk about enough is gatekeeping behavior. So if anybody is on our chat and you have things to add about gatekeeping, as I start to give my little preamble about gatekeeping, please type it in. One of the things that we are finding might be the most impactful behavior in terms of bans and challenges is gatekeeping behavior. So what that means is not even getting the book to the shelf. So a lot of times we do find with content that has been flagged as being, quote, controversial, and we'll talk a lot about what controversial might mean and how it's so dependent on the audience, but a lot of times teachers and librarians, parents may not even choose to purchase that content. We'll sometimes even see exclusionary behavior in terms of what stores choose to stock what titles. And a lot of times what we also see is in a mass market environment, a lot of times stories from maybe voices that we haven't heard as much don't even make it to print, even because of the pitch process itself. So gatekeeping behavior, super pervasive, and may actually be the thing that actually keeps a lot of books from even getting into kids' hands. Zach?
Yes, thank you.
I was like, put my librarian on it.
I saw it on the sheet and I wanted to make sure I knew what it was.
I mean, and I think as we talk, especially some of the stories, Grace has already experienced gatekeeping even recently. So we're going to talk a lot more. But before, I want to make sure we do our fantastic little intro to your work. I was sort of fanning a little bit already about Lumberjanes and Moonstruck. But if you want to do a little hello to the audience and just talk about some of the works that you're known for and some of the things that you have upcoming that you can talk about.
Okay. So hello. I'm happy to be here. I'm so excited to talk about this stuff. So my first comic ever, probably the one I'm most well known for, is Lumberjanes. It's a monster fighting Girl Scout story. It's like definitely for kids. Just gonna up top, it's definitely child friendly. but there are gay characters in it and a couple of trans characters. And then my book with Image, which I love so much, is Moonstruck, which is a werewolf barista lesbian romance adventure. It's a real sweet story. It's a very sweet book. There's lesbians in that one too, and we've had some of the gatekeeping problems that we've had with some of the gatekeeping issues we've had with Moonstruck have we'll talk about it, but they're a little bit of our own making because we didn't have an audience in mind when we started it. But we can come back to that.
Yeah.
Stuff that I'm working on right now, we're still going with Moonstruck. We're going straight to trade now. So around Valentine's Day of next year, put that in your library, Don't need those floppies. Get that crap out of here. I think that's the only one I can talk about. Yeah. There's other stuff, but it's like implied. And I could, but it's like an implied NDA.
Okay, can you explain NDA for our audience? Because I just heard the term this past weekend and I was like, what?
Yeah, NDA is a non-disclosure agreement. They, especially if you're working on something for the big two, or it's like a contract.
Oh.
They'll make you literally sign it to tell you that you can't work on it. And then there's just in general, you shouldn't talk about projects before the big announcement. Yeah. So that was an implied NDA. But,
interesting.
That's more of just manners though,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And also it's good to have a good the Marvel or the teasers. We're so that anticipatory thing when the books are coming out. Yeah. So before we dive into especially gatekeeping and talking about a little bit more about Banned Books Week, do you mind just telling our audience a little bit more how did you get into comics? Was it something that you had always wanted to do, or how did you happen upon it?
This is a great question, and it makes me feel like a real jerk when I answer it. So it didn't occur to me that comics could be a thing, a job for a person. So I was studying journalism and I was studying script writing. And I just knew that I wanted to be a writer in general. And I was writing for this website, Autostraddle, which is a very prominent queer women website. And they get gatekeeped a lot too. But I know. So I was doing work for them, and I had made this friend through the website, and I had a vague idea of what she did. She was some kind of an editor.
Yeah.
And it ended up being Shannon Waters, and she's an editor at Boom. And our friendship was at its peak right when she was starting Boombox, and she was do you want to write something together about girls? That's the only thing it has to be is about girls. And I was is there another kind of book?
You're yeah.
Lumberjanes happened. And I was cool. So this is a fun side project. I'll just go back to journalism. Very serious plays. And then I was oh, this is a job that I could do forever. And it makes so much sense. Looking back, I was reading the strips in the newspaper every single day. I grew up in the 90s. I did not, but I was super into Calvin and Hobbes, so it was it is what I was probably meant to do, was comics.
Cool. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. So I do think that that's something we hear a lot from, especially young readers of comics. They don't even think it's a viable career path.
Right. Yep. It's not a viable career in many ways.
I mean, I think you're sort of a poor person to talk about that because Lumberjanes has been so widely successful.
Yeah. Lumberjanes kind of I understand that this is a weird thing for me, but it's not sustainable as a lifestyle. I mean, you got to work yourself to the bone, just nonstop.
No, it's true. I think that has been one of the nicest things about Lumberjane too. It's just the huge wide appeal. All of a sudden, something that may have been considered sort of a niche thing, as you said. And I think one of the biggest things as we get into talking about bans and challenges is that a lot of times there is this sort of idea of an quote intended audience, but sometimes books really surprise people, I think. I think also we see that with Lumberjanes is that there is such.
No.
Oh, did I the connections? No, no worries. I think it's been so, the appeal has been so widespread and just reached such a large audience with Lumberjanes.
Yeah, you can't plan for something like that. It just happens, and you just got to roll with it. There's no like secret sauce to making that happen. It just does or it doesn't.
Yeah. So what was I going to say? So we've got some of the things you're working on right now. We can talk about some things that are coming. So you talked a lot about Calvin and Hobbes. Were there other things that either as you were coming up or even as you were writing Lumberjanes and just getting started that were really inspiring for you?
Okay. When I was a kid, I was super into this comic strip called Cleats by Bill Hines because I played soccer. I have this haircut. I am gay. I like really, it's like, it's so strange to go back and read it now because I like, the like sense of humor in that strip is like not, it's like not my sense of humor, but I really connected with it. It's because he had like women playing soccer and I saw myself directly in that. And it was really influential for me. I like at some point there was like some school project and I like wrote him a fan letter and he wrote back and it meant so much to me. Oh. I know. So I try to think about that whenever like a kid writes to me. I'm like, I hope that this like means something to them. And if it doesn't, I guess that's also fine. Yeah, I was super into the like into daily strips, Sunday strips too, but the idea of like doing that much work every single day is still I just can't even. I mean, I know they're not doing like one every day, but still, they're multiple. It's so much work. I can't even imagine. And I'm trying to think of like, okay, so the real like genesis of Lumberjanes, I think. So Autostraddle does these camps every year. It used to be cool. Oh yeah. You should definitely check it out. It's very fun. It's called A Camp. They do them in California. They used to have them twice a year, but now it's like much more manageable, one a year. And I was a staffer, and Shannon went to them like every single year. And they're so fun, and there's just something so unique about like a group of women in the woods together. And we were trying to think of like a natural setting for like where is it like segregated by gender in like the 21st century. There are so many places, and camp like was immediately like that was just the answer, and the whole thing was going to be a camp from that moment on.
So cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Image Comics, for everyone who is listening along, has just very kindly put the link for the Autostraddle camp. I'm gonna be registering right now. I just found out about the John Waters camp too, and I was like,
that makes sense. Yeah. Well, we're trying to build community wherever we can,
Yeah, no, I think it's awesome. And I think that is sort of the great appeal too, like talking about the camp and it being, I think like that's something, even as we were preparing for this, I was thinking about with both Lumberjanes and Moonstruck in some ways, especially like the way that they're marketed almost, again, for this niche, quote, niche audience. But in fact, they have such a wide appeal, I think, because there is such a sense of community with them.
Yeah. I think for both of them, one of the core ideas in building the worlds for them was like making something that any person could like feel comfortable stepping into and like feel like warmly invited into the world. I mean, I think about like there are a lot of worlds I wouldn't want to live in. Like I wouldn't want to live in most superhero worlds.
Okay, tell us which ones.
They just seem terrible. There's always so many bad things happening. I don't have any superpowers, so I just would die immediately. So that's why I want to do these stories about these normal people. In like totally normal worlds, ish.
Yeah.
Who are succeeding, because that could be me, that could be you, that could be anyone.
That's a good point. Yeah, a lot of times when we envision the worlds, they do tend to have sort of a negative connotation. It's like the worst, most like negative parallel, to our own. Yeah.
Really. Yeah.
It could be positive.
Yeah. So that's what that was like definitely a main catalyst of those two stories to tell something that was just like nice. I mean, there are plenty of books that are about bad things happening to gay people specifically. Like one of the projects I'm working on is one of those. But I think that there is so much room for happy gay stories at this point. Like there's so much room. And I just want to contribute to that a little too, you know?
No, I think that's such a good point that like it's there should be, you talked a lot about representation, even when you're growing up reading Cleats, that there's something very powerful about seeing yourself, especially reflected in comics. And so I think to give a broad spectrum of experiences completely makes sense. Oh.
Yes.
I also, it just occurred to me, totally a serendipitous accident, I actually have Girl Guide cookies that I've been eating, because, you know, in Canada, they're Girl Guides and not Girl Scouts. So
is it like Girl Scout cookie season, or is it just they're just there?
So they do it slightly differently. Like, okay, so chocolate mint is only available apparently this time of year in Canada, and then they have a weird like wafer cookie that's available in the spring. So
okay, wait, they only have 2 cookies.
Apparently, I mean, you know, I think we have to.
That was like at all.
Okay, I was not in Girl Guides in Canada, though. So I'm like, anyone who's listening from Canada, I'm not the right person to speak for Girl Guides. I just thought that was kind of funny.
That's about to blow up. It's gonna.
I know. I'm like, oh gosh, social media. Oh no. So, do you mind sharing with our audience, Grace, some of the stories you just told me recently about some of the sort of, maybe we can do a balance. We can do like some really good feedback you've heard about your stories and some things that like go into, unfortunately, our topic for the week, some things that have you heard that have been maybe a little bit more concerning.
Okay. I'll tell a story that is typical and atypical.
Yeah.
So I went to this school for, I forget, it was some sort of like, it was like a GSA meeting of some kind. Yeah. And this girl had invited me, and she walked right up to me and she was like, so excited you're here.
Yeah.
It means so much to me, which is like, I mean, honestly, it's like insane that I just like make up shit in my bedroom and now people are saying these things to me. It's crazy, the disconnect. Awesome. So she like called over an advisor and she was like, so-and-so is our school librarian, and she thinks Lumberjanes is a teen book. And then she walked away. And I was like, no, why would you do that to me? Now I have to fight with this woman in front of all of these youths.
It almost seems like she did it on purpose, where she was like, hey, Grace.
Definitely had an agenda. Terrible. It was set up from the beginning.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
So the librarian came over.
She was like, I just think it has some like themes in it that kids it's not. She was trying to say it's not appropriate for kids, but she didn't want to say it's not appropriate for kids because that's homophobic.
Yeah.
But she wanted to say it because she was being homophobic.
Yeah.
It's tough, but she's a GSA advisor. It was so much. It was a lot. It was a lot to take in. Yeah, I know. What do you do with that?
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think oh gosh. I think that's a very important point in terms of like the use of coded language, especially when we talk a lot about books that are banned or challenged. We hear that a lot. We hear things about content and where should we put the books. And it's funny how we'll talk around what it is.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
I wish I had the list up in front of me. I'm gonna find it because there was some word that they used to describe this one summer that was like that, but I'd never heard it before, and I was so excited about it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So for our audience, one of the things that Grace and I were talking about is, if you aren't aware, a lot of LGBTQ content tends to be amongst the most banned, or in case of this one summer in 2016, it was the most banned and challenged book in all of North America that year.
I can't find it. This conversation eating up all my internet, but it was so loaded. I don't know. This one, Summer, is such a good book too. It bums me out that it gets covered so much.
Yeah. It's so funny too. I forget, I'm gonna blank, and I'm sure somebody hopefully in our audience on social media will point this out, but somebody had actually done a little bit of a market benefit analysis, and when a book is banned or challenged, it actually shoots the sales up. It's
Yes.
like, if you want to draw more attention to something, try to ban or challenge it.
Honestly, every time Lumberjanes like hits any kind of controversy, I'm like, yeah, definitely. Let's all tweet about this together.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes also because the controversy, it brings out people you be like, oh my gosh, there was this great virtual community that all thinks the same way and is like so in love with this as well.
Yeah.
So we've got like our problematic school librarian story. And then what are some other recent stories that you've heard or experiences with maybe Lumberjanes or Moonstruck?
Oh man. There was one at SPX. It was similar. It was someone at
SPX.
At SPX, yeah. It was another librarian. It's like almost always librarians who are saying these things to me. Here's the thing, which is like, this is what I look like, and like our banner is like super gay. So if you have a problem with that, you're probably just not going to talk to us. Like I've had some people like mean mug me a little bit and like whatever, I don't care. But like for the most part, it's like very self-selecting.
Yeah.
Lumberjanes, the cover of Lumberjanes is like a little more ambiguous, but Moonstruck is just like, it's gay. So there was this librarian came up to us while we were tabling at SPX, and she was like, these parents got upset when I put Lumberjanes in the YA section.
Wait, Lumberjanes?
Oh, not Lumberjanes. Sorry, Moonstruck.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because the cover of Moonstruck is really gay, and she didn't even say like the parents had like checked it out. There was none of that. They were just mad that it was there.
Mad that it was there.
Like, this is what always happens when this conversation happens, which is like a librarian says something and then stops and like waits for a reaction, and I don't know what reaction they want from me. I mean, I guess you're what? Those parents are wrong. I don't know. Put it in the teen section. Is that where it goes? Maybe. I don't know. Here's the thing. I'll circle back around to why I started before, which is that we didn't have an audience in mind when we did Moonstruck. Yeah. Just kind of like, this is the story we want to tell. This is like a very particular time in your life when you're like just out of college. It's like, and like I live in a college town. There are so many like people in this age group around me. Like it's super easy to write like that kind of dialogue. But so I just like kind of did it and wasn't really thinking about what it was, but there's nothing in it that's like objectionable. And I've talked to a lot of librarians about this, and the answers kind of run the gamut for like where they would put it. Kind of the most common one, I was at ALA this year, and the most common answer I got when I asked the question was they would say that it's like middle grade, but if the kid has seen Steven Universe, then they're probably fine with it. But I mean, maybe it's a teen book. I don't know. The characters are like in their 20s, so maybe it is a teen book. It's hard to say. That one is a little harder to pin down. But when people are like, Lumberjanes isn't for kids, you're just wrong. You know, it's a kid book. Yeah.
What's some of the feedback that you've actually gotten from some teen or even younger readers about your books?
Oh God, they love it. They love it. There was like a kid at SPX. He was like, oh, I'm bad at guessing kids' ages. He was probably like 10 or 11, and he was like, Moonstruck is my favorite book. And he like brought his copy that he bought at SPX the previous year, and he had his pins on his hat. All about it.
That's awesome.
That's what his favorite character was, and he paused and thought about it for like, I mean, you could have counted out 30 seconds. He was like, Chet, like very definitively after 30 seconds of thinking about it. And I really appreciate that tactic, you know.
Yeah.
Really weigh your options.
Yeah. Do you mind just for our audience in the live stream, if they haven't read Moonstruck, just to especially talk a little bit about Chet, because I think they're such a fantastic character.
Oh, okay. So Chet is a centaur, and they're non-binary. And we wanted to do a non-binary character for a couple reasons. One of them is that our artist is a non-binary person, and there just aren't a lot of binary characters. And Chet became like an obvious choice to fill this role, because we were thinking about centaurs and how centaurs aren't people and they aren't horses. They're a totally different thing.
Yeah.
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 So good. Right. Plus, so there's this thing in kids comics, or like young people comics in general, actually most comics, where you have to have, we've been calling it, you have to have a cat bug. You have to have a character who's like very cute and lovable and sweet and like quick with the joke. You know, you have to have someone to balance out like when sad things happen.
Yeah.
And so making Chet the cat bug of Moonstruck was like, and it was perfect, because the other thing we were thinking about when we were putting together Moonstruck was like, I should back up. So Moonstruck was part of an anthology. It was a 5-page anthology. It was just like in and out, and it was it. There wasn't meant to be a bigger world. And then we had an opportunity with Image to expand it. Amazing. So we already had the characters and we already had the world. So then it was a matter of thinking about the characters and how they behaved in those first 5 pages, and how like a person who like looks like that and has those experiences in the world, like what their personality is. We just kind of went from there. So like the main character Julie, like who is this person who like is really like hates being a werewolf, even though in most mythology like becoming a werewolf is when you're at your most powerful. But she really hates it, even though there's like not even a cultural reason to hate it really. She just like it's not about it. So we went from there. And when it came to Chet, who was like not even like barely a speaking part in the 5-page comic, we were thinking about like this centaur is just like huge. Like even though Chet is like a Shetland pony, it's Chet Marconi, the Shetland pony. It's terrible. Naming conventions, who cares? So,
I love that.
even though Chet is a Shetland pony centaur, that's still like they're taking up so much space. And like it's not like being a werewolf where you can like put the genie back in the bottle in a sense. Like Chet is always going to be a centaur. So like they have like learned to live kind of like out loud, I guess is the best way to put it. Yeah. And that's how that happened. I love Chet. Chet's everyone's favorite. That's the cat bug, you know?
So, and I think the dialogue between Chet and Julie is so good too, just especially like because Chet's always sort of telling her to just sort of own like herself, like, you know, just like don't be, because she's freaking out about dating as like the first book opens and she's worried about like her showing her werewolf side, even though, you know, her partner is like a werewolf too.
Right. She just wants to be normal, and her idea of like what's normal comes from like the books that she reads, you know. It's there's a lot of themes in Moonstruck, but also it's like, where did Chet's butt go, you know? There's a lot going on in that book, only at Image, you know. You should put that on your business card, Image.
Image, where did Chet's butt go? Looking for Chet's butt. I wanted to share, we've got some really good feedback from the audience. The Flash 415 said, my son discovered Lumberjanes on his own when he was 13. He has the first 4 trades so far. He's still loving it at 15.
Oh, thank you for reading it. I love, oh my God, what an honor. Honestly, when kids are so picky, it's just, thank you.
Wait, looking for Chet's butt is desperately seeking Susan of the 21st century.
Well, there's your full quote.
Maybe looking for Chet's butt is the white whale of today's webinar.
Moby Dick. Oh my God.
I needed to worry. I did it. Boo. But I guess circling back to the kids' feedback, I think one thing also that we're seeing with the popularity of Steven Universe is that for so much of the bans and the challenges and even the gatekeeping behavior in general, there's sort of this fear or this concern on the part of adults that somehow they're, quote, protecting young readers. And yet I think, as you said, kids are pretty picky and kind of know what they like and what they don't like. So it's been interesting to sort of hear the feedback, especially from young readers.
Totally. Yeah. Man, it's so tough. I don't envy parents at all. I don't know what I would do.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like Steven Universe again is a great example of something that there was a lot of fear around Steven Universe, and it's become so commercially viable. Yeah.
Everyone's so afraid all the time. It's gonna be okay. Like,
yeah.
Here's the thing. Okay, so there is this, like, there's no other way to put it, prominent homophobe who lived like pretty close to me.
Oh wow.
I mean, not like next door, but like close enough that it was like, should probably watch her Facebook page in case she is going to be where I'm going to be, you know?
Yeah.
And she's so, every time any cartoon, specifically cartoons, she has a bunch of kids. They don't watch TV, but she's very concerned about these like lesbian Adventure Time.
Yeah.
It's like, my kids are never going to watch Adventure Time again. It's like, they weren't in the first place and now it's over. So I don't know what you want. She's so concerned that there are like gay people who just exist in general. There's like the coupling of like gay people and sex itself is just, it's so toxic and there's just no reason for it. And it's so frustrating. It's like the Bert and Ernie thing. Like obviously there are like straight Muppets. So what's the big deal? You know, it's not like they're gonna start having sex on Sesame Street. It's so frustrating.
Sex on Sesame Street. That's the way.
Well, that's basically what Happy Time Murders is, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's my understanding.
Yeah. Now I really want to go see it. But I think, like, again, with sex and especially this fear, like what we're seeing is so many of the bends and the challenges, like some of the books, Raina Telgemeier's drama has been in like...
that was one. That's the one I was thinking of. Okay, so it wasn't This One Summer, it was drama, and they said it was confusing. That was the word they used. It's like, what are you talking about? Confusing? You're gonna ban a book because you found it confusing, or you think a child would find it confusing? There's nothing in that book. There's nothing. Oh my God.
Yeah, so drama, for our audience who doesn't know, again, it's crazy. Like Raina Telgemeier's drama, which is one of the most popular books in all of North America, has also made the top 10 most challenged and banned book list for several years running, and it was in the top 10 this past year.
But why? It's so benign. It could not be more benign.
Well, one thing I was thinking was funny in Moonstruck, the juxtaposition of the Moonstruck main story and then the books that she's reading. I'm totally going to blank on what's the Pioneer.
Oh no, it's the Pleasant Mountain Sisters.
Okay, yeah. It felt very like Sweet Valley High, or sort of like Nancy Drew sort of like meets Sweet Valley High. And I think that was such a good juxtaposition, because like something like the Sweet Valley High books, or even any of like the teen dramas, it's so normalized, like a lot of heteronormative behavior, but also it's like this notion you have like girls starving themselves. I mean, I read the Sweet Valley High books when I was a kid, and it was always like, they were a perfect size 6.
I know. In the first, that's what the first chapter is describing the main characters, and it's always talking about how skinny they are.
Yeah.
That's damaging.
Well, that's just it's so funny. Like, you look at the actual incidents of like kids hurting themselves, like as they're trying to wrestle with all sorts of like who they are as teenagers and as adults, and it's like self-harm and eating disorders kind of a bigger deal than what they may have read in drama.
Right.
I think another one that's starting to get some attention, what's been great is a lot of critical attention in like the best way possible, is of course Jen Wang's the Prince and the Dressmaker.
Yeah, that was a matter of time.
Yeah, but that's also, I think, one of the nicest things about that book has just been to see how much positive feedback has been received about that story. And it's it's
a beautiful book.
Yeah.
It's such a sweet story too, man. It's okay. The kids who need it are gonna get it, you know. Yeah. And now it's gonna be even more tantalizing because their parents are saying no.
That's right. Well, I think that's also the funny thing is, so especially with comics, so we talked a little bit like how you were inspired to get into comics, but why do you think comics in general are amongst sometimes the most banned or challenged?
This is a fight. I call her my librarian, which is like, you know, she's retired now, so I feel like I can tell this story. But and like every single time I came in, she would rag on me for reading so many comics because she didn't think that they were real books. And it became like she knows where I am on this, and I know where she is on this, and it doesn't matter because she's not a librarian anymore. But but it's just like I think that's definitely part of it, is like this feeling that like comics are cheating and not really reading. So we should get rid of them all just in the first place, and now you're giving us an excuse.
Yeah. I was at a panel at Emerald City in March, and this came up. It was a really good panel, and Melanie Gilman actually was doing illustrations from the panel, and they posted one of the illustrations afterwards because a question had popped up from the audience, and it was sort of, again, this gatekeeping behavior, even amongst educators and librarians, because somebody in the audience had asked the panel, like, well, you know, how do you encourage kids to also balance comic reading with, of course, real reading?
Oh no! what a place to ask that question.
Oh yeah, I mean, the panelists were like,
yeah. I mean, I don't think anyone is just reading comics.
Yeah.
I mean, at the thing that gets tossed around a lot, and it's not wrong, it's just like you shouldn't have to defend it and you shouldn't have to rely on this, but it's, if nothing else, it's like a gateway to prose books, you know, because you like are like understanding story and like getting in the habit of reading, you know.
Oh yeah, and I mean, it's really sort of so fascinating, the research that's coming out, especially around visual literacy, and even a lot of times like the textual complexity of so many comics. Yeah. I don't know if you had a chance to listen yesterday when Matthew so Matthew is really involved in the graphic medicine community, and we're even seeing like, you know, huge uptick in comics for so many different purposes, but even like graphic medicine. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, totally.
So it's like, it's just a format for storytelling.
Right, exactly. Oh, man. I remember too, when I was a kid, I was super into daily strips, right?
Oh yeah.
I remember like very clearly my dad being like, oh, I used to read those too. And then I grew into the rest of the paper. And it's like, oh man, that didn't happen for me.
Yeah.
I do. But you know what I mean.
And no, it is funny, yeah, that there's still this implication. And so I do think that is sort of, there again, this fear. So like we've talked a lot about with LGBTQ content, there's a lot of this fear. And I think, again, with like comics not being seen as real reading, there's this fear again, like that somehow, I don't know, like kids will be led astray. They will be both, I don't know, queer and illiterate by reading.
Yeah. That's what happens when you read comics. You become queer and illiterate.
Well, it's funny because like if you think about superhero comics like that, I think certainly there's been a lot of pushback about superhero comics, but the fact that they've sort of been normalized, and yet if you like just take them at face value, I mean, these are people literally like dressing up in costumes, right, and there's a lot of violence, and that's sort of okay, and yet dramas.
Honestly, we've been playing the SpiderMan game, and it's making me think so much about vigilantes and like, oh my god, you should not, like, even more than any comic I've ever read, it's making me, because it's like you are Spider-Man in like a very literal way, it's making me feel like, oh, I don't know what the right answer is. It's not the police, it's not Spider-Man, it's definitely not like the army coming in. What's the answer? Anyway, this is very off topic, but it's stressing me out now.
I've heard good things about the Spider-Man game, but I haven't played it myself.
It's so fun. It's extremely good. That's my review. Thanks for coming to this channel.
And we're done now, right?
Yeah, right. And books. Everyone plays Spider-Man. All the books are over.
So Grace, what would you give in terms of advice or even some feedback for maybe younger people who wanted to get into comics, or even maybe people whose parents are listening and are like, oh, comics, I don't know.
Okay. Wait, this is two different questions.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're a kid and you want to get into comics, or anyone. So the best time to start writing is yesterday. The second best time is today. So you have to start writing ASAP, and you should do it regularly. It doesn't have to be every day, but at least like a lot. You have to write a lot, and you have to finish what you write. That's like that's the biggest thing. Is it doesn't matter. Ultimately, it doesn't matter how good it is. You just have to be done with it. Because if you're just thinking about it and it just lives in your head, then that doesn't do anybody any good. But if it's on the page, at least you can like edit it and make it better. So that is my advice from me to you. If you're a parent who's not sure about comics, about like letting your kids like indulge, I guess, in comics, I think, okay, so I've met a lot of adults who don't know how to read comics. Because there's definitely there's a specific kind of literacy for comics. There's like it's the visual language of comics is so particular to the medium too. You should be reading manga too, because I didn't know how to read manga until a couple years ago, and that's a whole other thing. But it's good to like teach them young, you know, so that they just grow up and always have that skill. People don't know like what order to read the panels in, and they don't know like what all the different like bubbles mean. And it sounds crazy a little bit to like people who like understand, but like genuinely like it is a skill to like know how to read comics. Also, like I'm really big into talking about form and like thinking about the form of things and like the different strengths of all the different mediums. No comic I ever write is going to be like accidentally a comic, you know, like sometimes you can read a comic and you're like, oh, this like fine, you can definitely do that. But I think that if you're really thinking about the form, there are like certain strengths that comics have that other mediums don't have. So engaging with comics can like, it teaches you a lot about storytelling, and it teaches you a lot about other mediums, and it teaches you a lot about structure. I love comics. They're so good. Sorry.
No. I mean, like, I'm just like listening to like, this is such a great love letter to comics. No, I was going to say, especially in Moonstruck, I think you do there's a lot of interesting storytelling with the way you're splitting up the panels, and even sometimes the way you break the panels. Like there'll be a single white line in most, but you have a few where there's like more magic in the panels, and there's like the double lines. And
that's not me. That's all Shay.
Yeah.
I mean, Shay is so good at like reading and interpreting scripts. It's like messed up, honestly. My main contribution is the Pleasant Mountain stuff, and like making it like extra cerebral for no reason.
Well, yeah, you feel there's a lot of like, it feels like a lot of hidden Easter eggs too, even in the writing.
Oh, for sure.
My favorite, if people haven't read Lumberjanes, is of course the swearing. Not the swearing or like the catchphrases and stuff in Lumberjanes. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so one of the characters in Lumberjanes is named Joe, after Joe from Little Women.
Yeah.
Joe from Little Women is not constantly, she says it like 3 times in the book, but I remember her doing it constantly. She says Christopher Columbus as like an exclamation, but like we wouldn't ever say that, you know? So the feminist equivalent would be like a feminist name, you know? Yeah. So they always say they're like Joan Jett in the first one, and there's like Mae Jemison, and they're just like, it can be in any context. It's any swear word.
Yeah. I thought that was also just such a great way, even if like you're reading it with younger readers, or even just to be like, do you know who Jemison? Right. And apparently there's a new Joan Jett documentary. So
oh, exciting. I would go see that.
Yeah, it's called Bad Reputation.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, totally. No, I thought that was one of the best things is like there's so many different elements that are going on. What was I going to say? Oh, one of the other things, and you brought it up with working with Shay. There's so much I think that goes on behind the scenes too with comics. Like even when we're talking about the creative process, a lot of times people will sort of over focus on the writer. And I know in Library Land, we don't do a good job, even in terms of our catalog records. We're always preferencing the writer, but there's so many people that actually go into making a project.
Yeah, totally. We have a whole team. There's me, there's Shay Beagle as the writer, Lauren McCubbin is the editor, and the 3 of us are the creators. And then we have a letterer, Clayton Cowles. He letters like every book. Caitlin Quirk does coloring for us. So it's
an awful lot. Like there's a huge team behind. Yeah. Oh, we have a few questions that are coming in from the audience. Oh, sorry, Grace, you got cut off for a sec.
Sorry, it like freaked out at me. Okay, hello. Back.
So we have a few questions that are coming in from the audience. This is a good one. So how did marching band parties influence your latest arc of Moonstruck?
Okay, this question is a setup, Sean.
Yeah, we know who you are, Sean.
Okay. I see you. Okay, so the second arc of Moonstruck is about, we start to get into like campus life a little more, and it starts with them going to a frat party. And I never went to one. There was a while where I lived across the street. I should have brought this up. Sean moderated a panel, and this is how he knows the story. But I should have brought this up. But I lived across the street from a fraternity for a while. The day I moved out, they like had rented a bounce house, and I was like, exactly. I never went to a fraternity party or anything. But I did go to a marching band party, which is very comparable as it turns out. They're so intense. Wowzer. There was a couch that got set on fire, and I'm not making that up. It was inside. And I was like, I have to go. And I never went to another party like that again.
Wait, so is there a flaming couch in like the next one?
Yeah. I was like, people were like, I think the couch is on fire. And I looked, and there was like smoke, and I was like, I can't do this. But it's the Ohio State Marching Band. They're and it was before all of the like reforms that happened.
The reforms.
It was a different time, and yet the same time.
Those rogue marching band days.
They're not messing around.
No, it doesn't. I think what's funny is just like I was thinking as I was rereading Moonstruck last night, just preparing for our talk, and it was also like just like revisiting like a warm, comfortable friend, and I was like, oh, this is so great. But especially again, like the playing around with the idea of like what normal is. Like it is so funny to be like the frat parties and the marching band parties are normal, and that's a easy college experience.
Oh, yeah.
And yet that's sort of subversive and actually, can not lead to great things. And so again, it's funny the way that things are othered, and not normal.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I thought even, sorry, we have some really good feedback in the chat. If you guys are not following along with chat, we have, I failed as an adult by never renting a bounce house for a party I threw, but I guess I've never been to a party with a flaming couch. So that's one in my favor. I feel like we're all missing out. Moonstruck, the next trade volume, what do you think? Like,
yeah, we'll have like a launch party.
Okay, Image Comics. This is what we need.
Yes. We are not a big enough book to like warrant this at all, but I would definitely do it.
And we'll only invite library.
Yes. Oh my god, that would be the best party. Only librarians invited.
But only good library.
This is being very, very selective.
Very select. Oh, well, we've got a really nice feedback from the chat. This person writes in, I'm a 40-year-old MLS student, wasn't a comic reader, but wanted to get familiar with the format so I could be a better future librarian. I started Lumberjanes. I love it so much. I wish there was something like it when I was a kid. It was my gateway drug because now comics are totally my passion.
Oh. I'm so glad you liked it. And now you can recommend it to all those little kids. That's very sweet. Thank you.
Oh, and also professionally, let me say thank you for writing that in. One thing that we do hear a lot from educators and librarians is that they themselves are not comic readers. And one of the things I always say, like personally, I don't read Westerns. No offense to Westerns, FYI. But like,
listen, you're not going to love every genre. That's
no, totally. No, but professionally, like it's our job to actually be knowledgeable and also treat everyone with dignity. So when they come to the desk and are like, I'm looking for something to read, or this is what I read next, I don't say, oh, Louis L'Amour. No, I mean, like he's written a lot and there's some really great stuff that's come out. I think especially with comics, like just knowing that they really are such a broad format, especially seeing so much, as you said, manga is its own thing. We have so many great European comics that are finally on the American market. We have so much great stuff coming out of Latin America. So I think there to say you don't like comics is pretty limiting.
It's honestly like saying you don't like movies. Like I could make
I know I mean, we would really be doing our jobs terribly if somebody came to the desk and they're like, I'm looking for this TV show. And we're like, we don't watch TV. Our librarian, right? I mean, like, yeah. So we've got about 9 minutes left. So if we have other questions from our audience, or if Grace, if there's other things we haven't touched on, or some stories from school visits, or even if you wanted to talk, I know you're going to go to the Columbus. It's the Columbus. It's called the Columbus Arts Fest, or what is the exact?
Columbus Crossroads.
The Columbus Crossroads, which is kind of like the Columbus equivalent of Small Press Expo.
Yeah. It's really cool. They have it all over the city.
So
and
cool.
Like, Billy Ireland does a bunch of stuff. Billy Ireland has like this unbelievably enormous collection of comics, exclusive comics. But they have like the expo happens at the main library branch, which is really neat for like a lot of reasons. But it's really fun. It's a good time.
Super cool. So everybody in the Columbus area, Grace will be there all weekend.
Oh yeah. I'm doing a couple panels too. One is about gay stuff, and the other one is about Moonstruck. So it's my typical.
We want to hear more. This is great. So any other burning questions from the audience? Guys, right in right now. So you said you can't actually talk to us about the fantastic stuff you have upcoming. So a lot of people have written in, maybe wondering if you're writing SpiderMan. So
I'm not
just
writing
stay tuned for that.
All right. Oh my God. I wish. I want to do Marvel, if you're listening. I would definitely do a Mary Jane journalism comic, though. Characterization. It's great because it feels really like obvious, where she's just this like tireless journalist. But like, it's great. They could definitely do a Mary Jane monthly. I'd be all about that.
A Mary Jane monthly. That'd be so cool.
That'd be great.
That'd be awesome. We could do it. Please,
yeah,
I hope somebody from Marvel, if you're watching.
Yeah.
So let's see. So one question that's come through: when you were a kid, did you ever read a comic or book that your parents objected?
Wow, is there ever a book my parents didn't want me to read?
Yeah.
Is there anything they did want me to read?
Oh, really?
They were okay. Here's the thing: is my parents are bad people. They disowned me when I came out. They found out, and they like sent me these emails that were like, "Never come back." And I was like, "Okay." So it's basically like, like Harry Potter was like baseline, and then like most things after that.
Oh my gosh.
It was okay. I was super into reading, and I was lucky that we had a really like deep school library.
Yeah.
So I just read it all anyway. You just have to read it at school and leave it in your locker. It's not that hard. I'm not that crazy.
Yeah. No, I think we hear that from a lot of, especially young readers, that there's such a community from reading that is built up, especially if they have a supportive school librarian or an educator.
Totally. And we had like book clubs and stuff. I was really lucky.
Yeah. One things we had talked about when we had chatted yesterday over email, that even we talk a lot about gatekeeping. One thing that isn't talked about so much that I just wanted to sort of give a reminder to all the librarians and educators who might see this is a lot of times we talk about gatekeeping. What we don't talk about is also how we're purchasing. And sometimes that if we're just purchasing from the same people we always buy from, we're just going to continue to buy the same content we always buy. And that it's really important to go to things like Small Press Expo, go to Columbus Crossing, or really seek out more indie publishers and really think about the books that we're buying and thinking about the audiences and the communities we're serving.
I agree. You said it so well. I don't
Oh.
know.
Bad moderator.
No, that was perfect.
Yeah, we hear it too. A lot of you talked a lot about the work that you've done like with GSAs, and I've even heard for some GSAs, like one of the things that they've done that's really fantastic are like zine making workshops with teens.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's some really kids are so open to doing basically anything.
Yeah. You
have to get them over like being too cool for it, but if you can do that, they're down for anything, you know? Yeah.
No, and it's so cool. We see such great content, and yet I have had the discussion with some librarians and educators that, yeah, but if the kids make zines, like I don't know how to catalog them afterwards, and I'm like,
oh my God, that's what's gonna hold you back. Okay.
I'm like, maybe we need to meet them where they are, and if they're making really fantastic local content, we need to think about how we can support them. That's my PSA for the evening. So we have a few more minutes. Grace, is there anything like any titles that you wanted to plug in terms of things that you're reading right now that you find really inspiring that you wanted to give a shout out to our audience?
Okay, so Chris Sabella and his crew,
yeah,
Crowded, so good. I love Crowded, and Kevin Panetta let me read Bloom early, and that's great. Love those two books. Those are the two that come to mind immediately. God, mostly I've been reading like real nerd stuff lately. Like,
tell us about the nerd stuff.
I never read Save the Cat before a couple weeks ago, and now I'm like obsessed with it. I know it's like not every writer likes it, and there are like definitely things I don't agree with, but like it's this book about screenwriting. It's like the book about screenwriting for a lot of people. And he like breaks down how every single movie like works on the inside.
How?
Yeah, and it's like kind of uncanny. Like I read it and then I like watched a couple movies, and it's like pretty spot on.
Yeah.
There's stuff in there like when he's like, this has to happen on page 12, and you're like, that's a suggestion. And then you're watching all these movies and you're like, oh my God, it's happening on page 12. That's crazy.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, so Save the Cat. Man, you gotta read it like kind of critically, but it's great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm working on a bunch of different comics, but I'm also working on this play right now. So the motivation for this comes from spite. So
it's a good motivator.
There's this playwriting grant that happens every year in our city. So lucky that we have this. And I've entered it 2 times now, and I've never made it to the final round. And I've gone to these plays, and I am furious that I was not picked for the final round either of the times I entered. So now I'm writing a play that I think will appeal to them, and it's the first thing I've written that's been about men, like specifically. So who knows what that's going to be like, but man,
can all the parts be played by women?
Maybe. Who knows what's going to happen at this point? It's about, okay, here's the other thing. Here's a piece of writing advice. When people say write what you know, they don't always mean literally. It's more of like, you have a unique perspective and you should use that unique perspective. So I've lived in Columbus for like almost 10 years now. And when I came here, I was a really big Ohio State football fan. I'm not anymore. I think for like a ton of reasons. But one of the things that really bothers me is everyone gets really hyped up about Woody Hayes, who was this great football coach. He like turned the Ohio State team into this like championship winning like every year situation. But he is like a brute basically. And the very last game he ever coached, it was a real pressure cooker. It was a bowl game, and this kid caught a pass. He intercepted a pass, and he like was over by the Ohio State sideline. And Woody Hayes punched him. He punched a kid on national TV, and he was fired. And everyone's like, we love Woody Hayes. And it's like, he punched a kid on national TV, you know? And this happened in the 70s, so it was like a different time. When it happened live on air, like the announcers didn't even say anything about it because they weren't even sure it happened. But we know what he did now, and everyone's like fine with it. Yeah. And this kid, like, he suffered a lot basically. I'm sorry, I know we're trying to wrap up.
Oh,
but,
no, good. No, I want to hear the rest of it.
So basically what he got out of it was a 15-yard penalty, and then Woody Hayes called him and didn't apologize and asked him like how he had like been in that position to make that interception.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Huh.
And he like, for a while, this kid like changed his last name to his girlfriend's last name because everyone was like trying to talk to him about this horrible moment where he got punched on national TV.
Oh my goodness.
He like is an Ohio State fan now. It's like there's so many like psychological toxic masculinity layers to dig through, and it's so fun.
Yeah.
But see, this is a good example of talking about form. Like this became like this project because like I wanted to submit something, but like this kind of book would not work very well as a comic. Well, you could do it, but I think that it's the kind of thing where like we live in Columbus. This is like the kind of thing that like could be immediate for the audience. Like it's like a community thing in a very like particular way.
Yeah.
So you have to think about like how your audience is going to interact with this thing too. So
oh no, totally. That's like the other element is like the reader and the audience. They are participatory elements in everything that's going on.
Right. So something about like that's like a nice warm fuzzy comic. Like that's great to read by yourself because you feel like a community with like the characters.
Yeah.
But something that's like about like a bigger thing that's happening like in this direct community, like put that on stage and make everyone confront it face to face, you know?
Yeah. It's like a act of reconciliation.
Right.
Yep.
Exactly.
So I want to give just a shout out before we wrap up that if anybody on the line or if anybody watches afterwards, if you do encounter any bans or challenges or you have questions, you can also contact the American Library Association Office of Intellectual Freedom. That's the OIF. They provide confidential support to anybody undergoing a challenge or ban. So they can also give you advice if you've maybe heard. We actually had a recent challenge in Maine. I don't know if you heard about this, Grace. It was actually for Banned Books Week. Somebody had put up a Banned Books Week display and somebody had actually seen that some of the books were queer titles and said that they had a problem with it. And we were like, it's during Banned Books Week.
I love that.
Yeah, I know, right? that was shot down. But if you do have, you can contact the Office of Intellectual Freedom, also the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. You can report censorship online. We have the link in our chat window, or you can call them at 1-800-545-2433, extension 4226. And yes, bans and challenges during Banned Books Week, oddly enough, do happen. So I know, right? You're just like, seriously? Right. Grace, it's been such a pleasure talking with you, and I'm so excited for everything that's coming up, and I look forward to your Mary Jane comic.
Yes, put that in your calendars, everyone. It's definitely happening.
The image may have texted that they're putting it up on Bleeding Cool after we finish, so hopefully this will start a rumor on social media.
I would love that.
Also, I'm super excited. The play also sounds fantastic. I really think you've picked some really good topics, and want to thank everybody for listening. We have 2 more to go. So we have Friday night and Saturday night. So listen in for the Moby Dick white whale moment for tomorrow and Saturday. Thanks so much, Grace. It's been such a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.